Right, okay. So hello everyone and welcome all teams for advancing this semifinal. We have YUU3 as an opening government. OG, can you say hi for checking the sound?
Hello.
Okay, great. And OO, we have KU3. Can you say hi?
Hi.
Great. And then CG will have YUU2.
Hi.
Great. And then we'll have CO as in KU2.
Hi.
Great. Okay. So having that, me myself is Xiang. I'm gonna be chair for this round, and I don't have any specific gender pronoun preferences. And along with me, there are wonderful judges, starting from Haewon, Jimo, Kmoyon, and Seokjin. Can judges introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Haewon, your DCA for this KUDC KNC, and I'll be judging you guys in the semifinals. Good luck.
Hello, I'm Seokjin Yut, Gracious, also DCA. Good luck, guys.
Hello, my name is Homa Yoon. You can just call me Homa.
And Jimo, are you there?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jamal and I'm from India and my preferred pronouns are he, they. All the best to the round, guys.
Okay, thank you. So having that clear, we have a Euro POI debate as in this round. So it is mandatory to take at least one POI that have been raised after 1 minute and 6 minutes. Before each debater start their speech, please clarify what clarify the POI preferences, whether you are going to take it verbally or via chat. And please do respect that request as well, right? Right. Also, please turn on your cam while you speak. So without further ado, under the motion that, under the motion that this House regret the narrative that eccentric personalities are essential to create art, we're going to have debate in soon. Just for seconds, I'm going to share the time. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Prime Minister to the podium. Here.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Before I start, I'm glad to see another YU team in the semifinals. Let's go YU first and the best. I'll start in 3, 2, 1. All right. On this motion, first of all, I think it is imperative that we define what eccentric personality looks like. So we define eccentric personalities as something that is irregular and not very symmetric or incongruent to the society's expected behaviors of how you should act. So in a Korean context, it would be like an artist who doesn't speak 존댓말, despite it is the social regulations. And I think this can even go further on to like maybe Korean rappers acting like their own drugs and they're being high, although they definitely aren't, because they may have eccentric personalities, or they feel like they have to be eccentric because of narratives such as this that we're talking about. And to give a more foreign example, I think it would be examples like Kanye West, who suddenly screams, "I am God," in front of people and whatnot. And we think that this ultimately eccentric personalities can also lead to eccentricness that is too much, that may be illegal, such as Banksy doing illegal graffiti all over the place because he is very eccentric and not following the society's rules, or Kanye West suddenly punching a journalist because he feels like it, right? So this is the kind of eccentric we're talking about. And I think there needs to be a clear difference between creativeness and eccentricness. We think that just because you're eccentric doesn't mean you do creative artwork. We think the eccentric personality and the artwork you produce, we think these are completely different realms. I think a counterexample of this is our own K-pop stars, they follow society's rule. They're very polite. They follow all societal regulations, but they still produce creative works that go to Billboard charts and whatnot. So we already give you the idea that creativeness of your artwork and your eccentric personal behavior and personality is completely different. Second preemption, I think the opposition might say something like eccentric personalities are crucial to artworks that serve a societal purpose. That means like criticizing societies and whatnot. Once again, we tell you eccentric personality and the output of your artwork and your nature of your artwork is completely different. I think a very famous counterfactual would be Kanye West. He's very eccentric, but his artwork actually condones Donald Trump and supports the status quo, saying like make America great again. So once again, we give you the idea that eccentric personality itself and the artwork is completely different, and non-eccentric people can produce, I don't know, creative and not societally welcomed artworks and whatnot. So now we want to move on to what this narrative does. I think that this narrative that considers this eccentric personality essential encourages two things. Firstly, it encourages or it makes eccentric behavior among the artists very profitable or more welcomed or more condoned. Second of all, I think that on the side of the audiences and the people who enjoy the artworks, this actually fixates the audience's attention away from the artwork, but onto more of the eccentric behavior and the personality of the artist itself. We think that this two nature of the narrative works for us to debate on why this narrative should be rejected or why this narrative should be agreed upon and welcomed. So now I'll give you my principal examples. Firstly, it will be on how this actually harms art in and of itself, both on the reception side of the artwork, the audiences, and the producers, the artists themselves. Secondly, I will talk about how this narrative harms societal values that art can produce. So firstly, on how it harms art. So firstly, we think that on the reception side, on the audience level, we tell you
Clarification.
that, yes.
What do you characterize the currently existing narrative that eccentric personality is essential to arts?
I didn't really understand your question. Maybe my speech will help you out. I'm sorry. So firstly, on the reception side of art, we tell you that because what receiving art is about is focusing firstly on art and what the ideas and messages and what self-expression is done through the artwork itself, right? But we tell you that this doesn't happen when the narrative says that you must have this personality on art, because this essentially says that you need to look at the artist and you need to look at whether this artist is eccentric or not to consider the artistic value or the artisticness in and of itself or of the artwork being produced. So we tell you that since the focus is shifted away from the artwork so much, because it clearly says it is essential, which is a very strong narrative and a very strong consideration, we tell you think that appreciation of art on the reception level does not happen very well. So this is that. But second of all, moving on to the production side, the artists themselves, because the narrative is that you need to have this personality, obviously audiences will be looking for artists that are eccentric and only their artwork, right? So we tell you that then artists feel pressure to have eccentric behavior. Why is this pressure so bad? Because we tell you that art is about expression of your true self and your unique self. We think that value of art intrinsically as a principle comes from expression of self, but when artists are feeling pressure to have a eccentric behavior, I already answered your QI, have an eccentric behavior to imitate a behavior that perhaps isn't their own personality, we tell you this expression of true self doesn't happen in and of itself as a fundamental value already. So we tell you that we think production of art does not happen of true expression. But third of all, we tell you that when this narrative makes it essential to have these kind of personalities, then we think artists who feel pressure to do this, and we think that because audiences also flock to this kind of eccentric artists themselves, we tell you this kind of eccentric behaviors and eccentricness will be the only trend in art. So we tell you the diversity of art itself will be dissuaded away from having different ranges and different type of artists. Rather, there will be this personality that feel like they're eccentric, even though they might not even be eccentric in and of itself. And we tell you that then eccentric no longer becomes eccentric, and we don't exactly know what this even is, right? Okay, second on the societal value of art. We think that art serves a purpose of being able to have some kind of empathy between the audience and the people that is appreciating it. However, when artists are eccentric and going against societal values, being abnormal and being very hard to sympathize with, oftentimes people are no longer comforted by art because they're so different from them. So we think that art genuinely loses its societal value when this kind of things happen. And my partner will further engage upon the lost societal value of arts that comes from this narrative. So we want to ask the opposition this. Why do you exactly need such narrative that harms art itself? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for your fine speech. Before I go on, PM, what is your name? Am I audible?
Wait, am I audible? Wait, I thought it was.
Am I audible, right?
Yes, audible.
Yes. PM, what is your name? Okay, right. Okay, so having that, I'd like to welcome leader of the opposition to the podium. Here.
Just give me 1 second. Sorry.
Okay.
Let's get my timer. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. So I mainly hear, I think, 1 or 2 things coming from opening government. First, they talk about how they first begin by characterizing how eccentric personalities itself is bad, which isn't really in the focus of the motion. We're talking about in the context of creating art. But I'll engage that anyways, because they talk about things like Kanye West punching reporters because he has an eccentric personality. But that's not because individuals with eccentric personalities are individuals that want to punch people. It's because Kanye West is eccentric. However, he also has the personality of being a shitty person. That's why he punches reporters. That's not really what eccentric personalities are. And they're making this bad image of, where eccentric individuals are always bad, but that's not really the case. And when that is the case, it's not because they're eccentric essentially, but it's because they have bad personalities in general. Okay, moving on. They also talk about how somehow societal value of art becomes worse when people have eccentric personalities, but they didn't really mechanize how this happens. And rather, I will prove to you in my speech about why eccentric personalities are essential to create art itself and how it will progress art even further. Now moving on to my constructives. First, I want to preempt certain arguments that will come from government side about how somehow amateur art won't be allowed because individuals have to be eccentric to create art. But here's the thing, amateurs are still allowed to create art, but the expectations of amateur art isn't as high in the first place. Therefore, the focus of this motion is more on individuals that create art professionally, that set like an age of art, for example. Those type of things are what we're focusing on in this motion. Now I'll move on to eccentric personalities itself later. This usually means that individuals who are usually abnormally focused on something or do things that stray from the norm. The prime example is K-pop. When you look at individuals that succeed in K-pop, in the K-pop industry, you see individuals that are eccentric in a way that they are obsessed with their craft. This is shown by K-pop trainees that essentially put K-pop over everything. This means that eccentric personalities usually stray from things like the norm of eating meals, sleeping, or whatnot. They skip meals to keep practicing and honing their art, honing their craft. The same type of eccentricity exists for creating art as well, where individuals are eccentric in a way that they create newer, innovative forms of art and are also obsessed with creating art. The point about why only hard work doesn't suffice and why you need an eccentric personality, especially for creating art, is because in order to break the norms of society, you need to be eccentric to be creative in a way that evolves art and breaks from societal norms. Because if you only focus on things like, if everyone just creates art normally without having an eccentric personality, individuals create good art. Sure, that happens. But the thing is, if you want to progress art from the state that it's in now, you need eccentric personalities that go beyond that. Now moving on to how this sets a realistic standard for individuals that want to pursue art. Because in creating art of any form, an important part is the sustainability that individuals can get from their craft. Just like becoming a K-pop star, they need to have the obsession that comes from being an eccentric individual. Therefore, it essentially grounds individuals where if they don't have the resolution, the grit to get through these hardships, then maybe they shouldn't pursue these things in the first place. Because even if you are insanely talented and because somehow you don't have an eccentric personality, you no longer can pursue art, I think that case is where you have talent, but you don't have hard work. And we see that hard work is essential in especially professional grounds of art, where you want to promote and innovate in this field. Now I want to move on to the impact that our side want to bring to, which is better artwork in society in general. Because when you want to make groundbreaking art, it's about breaking conventional norms. And if you're not eccentric, it's essentially not possible, as I've proved to you before, because the reason eccentric personalities are essential to creating art is because they break from societal norms, meaning regardless of whether the art is bad or good, when they're eccentric, essentially meaning that they're breaking from the norm, they're creating things that are groundbreaking. Why is this exclusive on our side? Because government side has eccentric individuals as well, because evolution in art is faster, because more artists are thinking about something eccentric, since people try to break apart from the norm. OG's world is where eccentric individuals still do exist, but they don't push for individuals to be eccentric, in which by definition to push away from the norm and to innovate and to evolve from what society restricts them from. So what happens is that in OG's world, what happens is individuals are constantly thinking about, okay, this is good art or this is bad art, not about innovating further of what art can and could be. So what this means is that individuals are constantly thinking about, oh, Van Gogh did this, I want to copy that form of art and do art that's not really innovative and whatnot. What we say is that those individuals can still make art, but that's what is essential to evolve art from the form itself is eccentric individuals that break from the norm. Yes, POI from closing.
So under your world, should profitability and success be a standard of what constitutes art?
No, that's not what I talked about at all, because I talked about in my second point about how it's just a realistic standard for individuals. Because these individuals that have the grit to get through it is what makes individuals create new and groundbreaking art. And we didn't talk about at all about profitability. We're talking about if individuals have the grit to get through the hardships of things like not being able to make money, but things like not being able to have a house over their head, because because they're eccentric, they're obsessed over their craft, which means that they're focused on these things, or focused on things about art rather than tangible things like money, because they are focused on their craft, which is essential which is a characteristic of being an eccentric individual, which is why it's so crucial in this in creating art. So what I've proved to you in my speech are two main things. Well, no, actually three main things. First, about how eccentric personality itself is a standard, not about what really OG talked about, how individuals stray from the norm in a bad way. We think in general, when you stray from the norm, you're eccentric in that way. We have proved to you and redefined this to you first and foremost. And we have given you an example of individuals in the K-pop industry where individuals have to have the grit to actually get through the training. And second, it's about how it creates a realistic standard for individuals. It grounds individuals to a point where if you don't want to get through for example, like K-pop, if you're not ready to go through the hard work that will become a K-pop star, then maybe you shouldn't strive to like get through all the hard work professionally. So therefore, it makes realistic standard for individuals. And third and most importantly is that we have given to you impact on how it increases and innovates art itself, which is the spirit of the motion, because we're talking about what eccentric personalities are essential to create art. And when we say create art, we mean individuals that innovate, that stray from the norm and create things and individuals that will see in the future and say, oh, this was very innovative, this was groundbreaking. And for all those reasons, I am very proud to oppose.
Thank you for your speech. Now I'd like to welcome Deputy Prime Minister to the podium. Here.
Am I audible?
Yes.
I'll take PY's at 6, so I prefer you to simply chat on the chat box. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Well, government actually has a very clear set goal, right? We're going to tell you how these art actually should have this positive impact by diversifying its field without limiting itself. But we're going to prove you why eccentric personalities are actually having it as an essential core essence in order to be a creative artist that actually discourages both on the side of production and also for people who are receiving this part of art, and actually discourages the field of art itself. So before I move on to any kind of principles, I'll first go on some rebuttals. Leader of opposition comes up to the podium and says, hardworking person who are enthusiastic within one field is a very, someone who is hardworking is likely to be very eccentric. And I do think that this is a very much of an unfair characterization, because simply you regarding people who have been diving into their field for such a hard time and being obsessed with those kind of successes, making very much of eccentric. We gave you some examples of people who are really like episodically eccentric, like people turning up and say, trying to like appeal to the public and try to grab so much of attention instead of like people who have been putting a continuous effort for a long time, right? We tell you that is a very unfair characterization of people who try to have these eccentric personalities. And also coming from leader of opposition is that, oh, we could actually simply separate bad and eccentric or whatnot. And they're trying to create a different kind of contextualization within the debate. They're trying to tell you rather it is okay to have eccentric personalities outside of your artistic field or your job occupation or whatnot. And that is totally different kind of debate to point out. And also, even if you buy your and they tell you that eccentric personalities are very much essential in order for you to change conventional norms, and they didn't even define what conventional norms are. We first tell you that it is still possible for you to break out whatever conventional norms are by not even having eccentric personalities or whatnot. Critical analysis does not only come from irregularities or you being irrational, but it's still possible for a logical human being to have and break such kind of art barriers that are currently existing within the status quo. And even if you buy your best case scenario of like having eccentric personalities is a very essential thing for you to break the conventional norm, that is a very problematic characterization and definition coming from opening opposition. First, conventional norm is not very much set up. It is actually defined by different kinds of eras and different kinds of social contextualization. And if you're going to tell like, oh, eccentric personalities are essential, then how are you going to also define those kind of things, right? And within a certain kind of regime or a certain kind of period, someone might define more norm as A, and someone might define as being eccentric as B. So A and B. So now, therefore, B is able to crush down whatever conventional norm, and they're able to quote unquote progress. But within the different kinds of context and period, it actually might be changing. So your contextualization of being eccentric that is necessary in order to break conventional norms is very much wishy-washy, and it does not help any kind of pull to create a true kind of art, and this actually discourages artists to come up with a true kind of creation, because they might feel such kind of barriers for them to leave whatever footprints they're likely to desire within their art fields. They're never going to be encouraged to express their true selves, but rather they might have such kind of extreme amount of pressure for themselves having to fit within the social contextualization or whatnot. So it actually decreases the possibility and the impact of you diversifying and you spreading the positive impact within the art field itself. We want art to be flourishing. We want art to be enriching to all these kind of publics, and lower the entry barrier for all those kind of to public to enjoy the art itself and have such kind of positive values for you to cure your mental health or whatnot, right? So I'm going to prove you why it actually decreases the societal values itself by having these kind of eccentric personalities. I'll take it 6. So first of all, we would like to address what kind of societal value of art itself has. First of all, you have the audience and you desire for such kind of empathy, and you try to comfort people who have been stressed out or who have been suffering under such an amount of pain within a very hectic and very fast running society, or they might have receiving such amount of stress. So that is a contextualization, and art tries to left such kind of pressures from all these people. What actually becomes very much hard for when eccentric personalities come up. First of all, when some artists have to be eccentric, first it creates a competition for people to become more and more appealing to the public in terms of being eccentric. You have to be irregular, and artists, in order to survive within that own industry, they have to feel these pressure, and it becomes super commercialized for you to be competing with who is more irregular or who is more eccentric. We do not want those kind of things happening under the side of the artist itself. And second, the impact is that audiences themselves might have feel more pressure for them also trying to feel eccentric in order to empathize within that art itself. So the problem here is that the production itself is definitely going to be distorted, while at the same time audiences might also feel the pressure for them having to be eccentric in order to empathize within the art. So it actually hurts the true core essence of art itself. So we do not want those kind of vicious cycles to happen under our side of the world. Instead, if you are able to instead, we do not want those kind of creations to be happening. And also for the second impact, the media is definitely going to define a descript art or whatnot. And those kind of the very potential impact and the very unexpected and unpredictable, the amount of immense influence that might have on the society could actually target different kinds of stakeholders. For example, children who might be within their young ages, and we do not those young children who might grow up within the society to be contextualized much of itself. Or irregularity is a very encouraged thing for you to for you to achieve success within these kind of art fields. We do not want those kind of harmful things to be tackling on under these kind of young children who might be the potential for our society. Before I move on, any PYs?
Okay, POI from right? Okay, so people that were gay were seen as eccentric and bad in the past. By these individuals constantly sticking with it and proposing it, they were able to make society accept it.
Now you're changing your stance because that in the time you say conventional norms are able to bring eccentric, and at the time it was gays and whatnot, and now you're trying to change the conventional norm itself and becoming a gay is no more eccentric. That is actually a very contradictory point that is pointed out from your speech, as I think, and trying to have these kind of positive impacts to be tackling be very much influenced under the side of both the grown-up audiences and try to have a positive impact rather than trying to commercialize and to advertise of being an eccentric personality as part of being art, so that these children might have been so much impacted and they might have a wrong and distorted version of what really art is. So we would like to keep the very clear and very much of a clear contextualization of what art itself is, and try to enrich and try to make it flourish within the overall society for the overall public to be enjoying the true value of art itself. We do not want a society where people, both producers who might be super pressured to produce all these kind of eccentric personalities or whatnot and artworks, and then these overall public and audience is not able to feel any kind of comfort, any kind of empathy, because they feel the very high barrier for them to being viewed within the society as being abnormal. So I'm more than proud to propose.
Thank you for your speech. I'd like to welcome DLO to the podium. Here.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. I'll begin my speech right now. When Edward Manet first released Olympia, he was a groundbreaking and very, very criticized artwork. We say that in those cases like this very, very groundbreaking moments of art, the reason why these people's personalities and beliefs in general are labeled as eccentric is because they try to break and challenge the societal norms. And we say that with the absence of these norms, of these expectations, not only is these movements are going to be slower and there's going to be less diversity, but also we say that there's less incentivization within the artists themselves to push themselves. And moreover, we say that also, even if that's not the case, I'm going to prove you in our third constructive how it is also a mechanism for freedom of expression within art. Okay, so before moving on, I'll quickly rebut to what OOG has so far talked about. First of all, PM talked about how reception on arts, they only focus on art, but people focus, it should focus only on art, but people focus too much on artists, right? And their eccentric personalities. First of all, we think that this can actually be a very, very good benefit that directly counters their entry to barrier argument, because audiences are drawn to eccentric and charismatic personalities. And you see that this can lower the entry barrier of art, where in the art world and in the art galleries right now too, the people who are just entering art or buying their first artwork in art galleries often tend to be individualistic in their choices. They tend to focus on artists anyway. And we see that this is not a problem. Those people who can appreciate art for itself, look at, let's say, its texture, its wonderful usage of color, are the minorities and the very critics anyways. And you see that the impact of this is that we can actually have a world where the people who like people, who don't have knowledge of art not right now a lot, can actually become interested in art in a world where art is very elitist and already appreciated by a minority of population, which is a problem that many people talk about. About then the main argument about artists feel pressure to become eccentric. First of all, we say that a lot of people who enter the field also in the status quo anyways have this personality that are compatible to this narrative. But second, we also say that there harms these individual artists feeling pressure is a minor harm if you want to weigh it against our benefits about how it leads to less diversity and innovation within the art movements anyways. Why is this? Because we say in their world, a likely world is going to be a world where artists play safe. Artists are going to be, there might be more artists, but we say that it's going to be a world where artists are conforming to the societal norms or the trends of right now, because there's no narrative that their personalities or their artwork are too eccentric or challenging, and rather what's going to happen is that they're going to follow the very popular movement of as of right now. Let's say, for example, modernism or postmodernism and whatnot. Third of all, about how there's going to be lower entry barriers, people can't enter who don't feel. We say that there are minimal levels of methods where amateur artists can express their art as of status quo. There's internet galleries where everyone can actually give their artworks. And there's also people who want to be evaluated without name value or without their personalities. They're anonymous art galleries too, something that is gaining popularity within its supporter. We say there are a lot of methods within art, and because there are some sort of alternative in our world, whereas then where compared to their world, there isn't going to be any benefits enjoyed by this narrative, we say that there is some sort of alternative in our world. Okay, let's then move on to reconstructing and talking about what our Elo has talked about. He first characterized eccentric personalities in 3 ways. First of all, just like OG talked about, challenging societal norms, right? Second, we also say devotion, sometimes even obsession to art, which actually is beneficial because it enriches the emotional intensity. Third of all, about how it gains more attention and can lower the entry barrier for beginners of art. We say that then we're going to prove to you why it is linked to creativity. Why is this so? Because we talked about in the individual level about motivation and incentivization, right? Beyond that, we say it benefits the art role because art is always about breaking what is considered to be right, what is considered to be, let's say, the conventional or the trending thing as of right now. We say that Picasso and Duchamp had never have been possible if it weren't for their eccentric personalities and their eccentric ways of drawing. And we say that the most important and the cherished moments of art when these people who might not have any sort of incentivization or protection in their world are able to do so. They're not, Picasso broke out of the dimensional restrictions he had. Duchamp broke out of a conventional canvas and even made art into ready-made objects. We say that these implications are very, very important because there's going to be more diverse and diverse movements within art. And we say in the goth world, there's going to be less expansion and resolutions. Before at POI.
Okay, you define eccentric as being hardworking, but wouldn't then hardworking people just hardworkingly follow societal conventions to succeed, not breaking away from conventions?
We say that it's the reason why they're viewed as eccentric and weird is not only because they work hard, they have a weird, like don't shower for 10 hours, but also because they do not follow what society views as normal or what people usually think. So we say not only to hardworking, just like you characterize and mention in your definition, it's about not subjugating to societal norms. Okay, and even if that's not the case, we say that even if a worst case, if it's not about creativity, eccentric personalities may not be so crucial to creativity. Even in those cases, we say that this narrative, so people believing so, proves as a mechanism for freedom of expression within art. Because there's this narrative into society, oh, artists are weird. Oh, artists make these kind of weird movies that normal people don't really think about. We say that this kind of understanding that artists are people who think different. We say that this kind of creates like a tolerance for more expression for artists. We see this in South Korea society a lot too. Artists are not shunned for the society when they say eccentric or weird things. If they're normal people, would probably have been like wangta or bullied from their co-workers and whatnot. We say that this can create more expressions that normal people or who aren't artists wouldn't have been able to say, increasing the diversity of opinions within society. So if you really want a better art world and a better world of opinions, vote for OG. Thank you.
Thank you for your speech. Now I'd like to welcome the closing half. A member of the government, please start your speech whenever you're ready.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. For some reason on my screen, it still says 7:34. I'm wondering if you could change it to 0.
I haven't changed 0.
Oh, no, just like, I guess restart the timer. Oh, okay, now it's refreshed. Okay, great. So my time starts in 3, 2, 1. Opening debate comes down to the definition debate over what hard work and eccentric means and how the society views art. Notice that this whole opening debate can be happening under a different motion of, quote unquote, this house believes an artist must have eccentric personality to succeed or create art. This is not the crux of the motion that this question is, that this is not the crux of the motion that actually asks the epistemological reason behind having such a narrative imposed on a society. What does this mean? The actual debate is coming down to the closing half. Panel, I'm going to try my best and to debate the crux of this motion, which asks the philosophical questions about relationship between artists and the art versus a society. Before I move on to this extension, I want to deal with the opening half. Much of the offense under opening opposition can be taken out for the fact that it is unclear whether their arguments are actually operating under the framework that is set by the OG or the modeling that is set by the OG. Go back to the definition that the PM gives you. Eccentric was about not being congruent to the society structure. Many of the offenses derived from the OO is path dependent on the facts and the necessary assumption that you need to be eccentric in order to have hard work or in order to be hardworking. We think that hard work and eccentric are just not the same. So and therefore, a lot of the path dependencies are very, very weak. Mechanizations to how to achieve diversity, very unclear, which I will address later. Let's move on to my first form of extension, which is about the relationship between the art and the artist. The opposition side of this motion is fundamental judging of a person, not in a body, but in form, because the only thing that individual has unique from other individuals is about the emotional state that has brought to the historical relationship that they have had with others. Our identity is derived from others and socialized. This is a necessary arbitrary judging of an individual, and this leads to passive dehumanization and discretionary prioritization of what identity should limit what sort of opportunities. Taking an individual and forming it in part respective to social cohesion or formulating it to what society arbitrarily demands makes an individual believe that their being is not worthwhile. We think that art is extension of your personality. DLO saying, quote unquote, art must go against societal norms necessarily states that your identity must go against the society in order to have opportunities to create these art. We think this is actually severely limiting the diversity that they so want to achieve from the first place. Now let's move to my second form of extension. What art ought to be. More of a principled justification as to why this motion should be passed instead of just engaging a bunch of example fights, what the opening half has been doing with Kanye versus Olympia. There are so many different artists, right? There are so many different like examples. There, like, government's going to say the good things, the opposition is going to say the bad things, but what is a principle that actually determines that the round tipping arguments? We think that the value of art is that it actually leads to more freedom, and the value criterion, the mechanism towards achieving freedom, is restraining away from imposing limitations on one's agency. I have 4 reasons under this. Reason A is a production of art is a product of humanity, something that every individual has the ability to create, and the personality and the product itself is up to the agency of the artist. This is not necessarily created to profit off of things. People can use it as a means to earn profit. Like, sure, people can be artists to get money, but that is not the cause of why the art exists, right? Which brings to my second point. My reason B is art is a way to express, and aesthetics is different for everyone. We think that this point is severely undermentioned in the opening half. Instead, they just go straight into what happens right after the art is produced. But we must also examine epistemologically why art is created in the first place. We think that when words fall is when music comes in. Like, that's like a very cliche quote, right? The artist ought not to have such personality to produce a work that symbolically represents their thoughts. True, Shostakovich went against Stalin. That was pretty not congruent to the society. However, that doesn't stop Liz, who was fairly polite and followed with the social norms, from creating masterpieces. So then therefore it doesn't work the other way around. But my reason number C is art is a universal silver lining to humanity. While things like retail therapy and getting other things, buying other things for enjoyment may be limiting to those with financial security, art is something that is universally available for all the humans, right? Like, it's when people out of despair or a vulnerable woman or under emotional distress, that is when they could defer to creating things. We think that when this narrative is supposed or actually placed, you're severely undermining the agency and the freedom of this marginalized groups of people who may be shy to speak out, or who may not have maybe I don't have eccentric personality in order to be making this art. It makes them feel they're not worthwhile, so society's expectations. It devalues their work, which you think is not the comparative, which we think is not the world that we want to live in. But then lastly, this means that the framework to determine who is artist should be as open as possible. Notice that this doesn't only work on the opposition side. In the comparative, what opposition says is art should go against the society in order to achieve progress. However, they say eccentricism is necessary to achieve things. We tell you there is an obvious substitute for that. Like, people in politics can do that. People in politics can probably, change the societal norms, and people in social justice movements can change the societal norms. However, there is no replacement for art, right? There is no other avenue that actually necessarily defers to the individual's choice and the agency in having control of what to create. It is okay for an individual artist to make the art for the sake of making art and having fun and feeling relieved. We think that is all possible, and it should be open to everyone. But then lastly, my third extension is that potential harms for narrative being imposed in a society. This narrative, if imposed, deters certain artists from making the art. We think this is pretty clear. But then this also creates more burden on the artists that limit their agency. This forces aspiring artists to change their behavior. Sure, OG tells you some of this, but we're going to tell you further impacts to this fluffy humanities claim. So first, it feels that their original personality is not worth pursuing because they're being the slave of society's expectations. It leads to silencing effect and chilling effect of the artist actually wanting to create the work that may be controversial in the end. That's what the DLO really wants to achieve, right? Secondarily, yes, PY.
Yes, could you explain in specific how these individuals are likely to change their artworks or personalities?
Yeah, sure. So if this, narrative were to be imposed, if one individual thinks that, oh, I'm just internally, naturally a shy person, or I don't really necessarily go against the society, then they may just feel oh, maybe the work that I'm producing will not be respected by the society worthwhile. And because the art is extension of my personality or identity, the society doesn't value my identity. And we think that is going to create, to my second reason, psychologically and mentally damaging behavior for the artist. Now let's engage with the opening half more. So DLO tells you that a lot of the people who enter into the field are already eccentric. This is down to truth testing, right? But then therefore this argument is a wash. But then they tell you that there's a minor harm for those who are not eccentric. No, there's immense harm because art is extension of your identity. The last thing that you want for these people to experience and so having these people think that their identity is not worthwhile. It is unclear as to how they're going to achieve more diversity if these people's art is being undervalued. But then they think that, oh, amateurs should not be creating art. Okay, like we don't really think that this really is like how level or like how skilled you are should contribute to whether you can make art or not. Like think about Mozart. He was like 5 years old when he composed Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. So proud to propose.
Thank you for your speech. I'd like to welcome a member of the opposition to the podium. Here.
Okay, my name is Sungan Lee. Okay. I'll start. The most individual is the most creative, is what director Bong Joon-ho of Parasite said when he thanked Martin Scorsese of actually him after receiving the Oscars of directors in his awards. We think that is what, in today's debate, the closing opposition uniquely comes up and says. We totally agree with the stance that the closing government says, that art is about expressing yourself. We think also that art is a manifestation of individual identity. However, we're going to talk about fundamentally what those identity really means and why this narrative benefits that individuals to actually reflect and express themselves more freely in a more autonomous way in today's debate. We think the opening half doesn't really have a stance in today's debate. Once they start to argue that how individuals are going to be successful when they have an eccentric personality, we're going to mechanize how this specific narrative is going to play a role in benefiting the individuals, the artists, the audience, and also the society, and how it shifts and liberates the art form in and of itself. Now, three things in my speech. First of all, I'd like to talk about the characterization of art and eccentric personality, which was never properly done in all three teams. Secondly, then, I'm going to mechanize as to how this narrative actually provides more individual autonomy and expressions. Lastly, I'm going to talk about the impact on the audience and the artists and the public. Let's first of all talk about characterizing an art and eccentric personality. First of all, we think that we agree with closing government in all forms that art is a manifestation of individual identity. However, we think that simply art is more than going against the conventional norms or actively fighting against the injustice in our society. We think that art individual identity could be something that is different from what society views to be normal. It doesn't necessarily have to be you going against and demonstrating against the government and so on and so forth, fighting against conventional norms. We think that it includes way more than that in individual identity. How is this done? It is done through different expression methods. How that is constructed, it is an accumulation of individual choices, and in the process, you have to choose the subject of art, field of art, method, the timing in which you're going to express and expose it to the audience, the field of audience and individuals who you want to show your art form in the first place. It includes specific purpose and decision that is individually made by specific individual and personnel of artists in the first place. How is it done? It is done through the lenses of individuals, preference, taste, ideology. We don't think that art in and of itself primarily is about social utility, how the audience sympathizes with you and so on and so forth, how people much love you. No, the primary purpose and the value of art is that it actually lets individuals to express and manifest who they are in and of itself. We think that is a clear different characterization we provide you from the closing opposition. And secondly, then let's move on to talk about what it really means to be an eccentric personality. Does it simply mean to have drugs? Does it simply mean to go against all these conventional norms and fight against the oppression of the government? No, we think that what fundamentally we can say is that eccentric personality means that you want to be a geek. You are a geek in some form. That is to say, it is a personality that has been created and expressed on persons, most individual things that is unique and different from other people, which comes from your specific special experience, including specific emotion, relationship, environment, education, family background, and so on and so forth. What is important that we come in closing opposition and claim is that every individual has their own eccentric personality. That is to say, you have your own part which you are geek to be in the first place. You have your specific own obsessions, enthusiasm, and interest in certain different parts. We think that what problematic is that the opening government says that it has to be you shouting out in the public, "I am God," or punching the journalist. And that's not true. We think the degree in which the severity of your eccentric personality is being exposed to seen as a society differs by individual. The matter of fact is that whether it's exposed or not, it's not different, that all individuals have their own parts of where they are to be geek and where they are to have eccentric personality. Let's talk about specific examples. You can be more exposed, like having draws. That could come from your trauma and loss of parent. You will want to escape from that trauma or loss, you do drugs. For example, you could even cut your ear off like Van Gogh did, because he was depressed due to the fact that his artworks were not appreciated. However, it could be in form that is not appreciated or acknowledged by the society. For you could have extreme cleaning obsession only in your home. You have to have your things in order. You have to have extremely clean things, but that does not being seen in the society. That is not recognized by the society. Also, you can a child could have obsession of Lego because it actually inherently has a good memory of his father, who has already passed away, has played with him, and so on and so forth. We think that it doesn't really necessarily have to be in grandiose form, that you have to be eccentric and express it to all the society. What matters is that these personalities being expressed and manifested throughout your art form in and of itself, we think that is what is most fundamentally serve the purpose of artwork. Let's move on to the mechanism. We think that the narrative compels individuals self-examine for their own eccentric personality. This is good because it makes them to consider their most individual and private parts, which only they know and understand the best. B, then it enables artists then to reflect their such personality, individual expression and experience and emotion to the artwork further. C, then it creates a counter narrative, a predominant narrative that only focuses on certain methods or field of art that is already monopolized by certain art schools and professors and individuals who have gone through those art schools, that predominant art theories that say that certain art is good and bad. I'll take closing.
Yeah, so that only those with eccentric personalities are like gaining these opportunities that you mentioned?
No, we just said that that's not true, because everyone can be eccentric in their own private field about which part they are geek in the first place. That is to say, it's the matter of how much you're being exposed in the society. Society recognizes you, but the important thing is that you don't have to be recognized of eccentric personality. The fact that you actually manifest it through artwork, because the artwork is what is being exposed to society primarily. Let's move on to the impact why that is good, because it motivates and let artworks to be more individual, not about knowledge or educational technique that is not core of the art we want to say. Anyone could be an artist with their own most eccentric parts, most personal and private experiences. For instance, if there are 100 artworks, it's going to be 100 different artworks that is unique from each other, because it's based on their unique eccentric parts and eccentric personalities from special experiences. This clearly fight against the currently pre-existing mainstream art industry that certainly prefers certain experts and critics saying that certain art form is good, certain art theory is good, and so on and so forth. What does this do? It clearly liberates art and the currently existing dominance of certain minorities, that is to say experts, professors, and certain artists of that it liberates now not only the artists to actually have manifestation of who they are and what they want to say, but also it also lets the audience to decide for themselves, because they have diverse forms of identity being expressed. Now they can choose what kind of form taste they're actually being matched the most, that what kind of taste is more individual and actually touching upon themselves. That is when the art is being liberated and being more democratic for all these individuals to actually enjoy and sympathize, and also most primarily express what's most important part of them. We're the one who talks about how art form should be most individual and how the narrative helps that. We're more than proud to oppose.
Thank you for his speech. Now I'd like to welcome Government Web to the podium. Here.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, with that being said, then I'll take my POIs orally. I usually take them by 6. So if you have any, shout them out at me, okay? And then with that being said, my speech will begin in 3, 2, 1. Panel, closing government is really regretful that the semifinals of KNC has boiled down into a definition challenge by side opposition, because initially that's the only contribution that both opening opposition and closing opposition is giving to this debate, rather than engaging onto the model that my member speaker has given and debating about the crux of the motion, which is, should artists and their personality be only eccentric in order to become creators of art in our society, rather than defining what eccentricism looks like in our world? Because what what opposition bench is initially failing to do, and they actually fall into the same logical fallacy that they are criticizing opening government as well as like closing government for, is what they're saying is that initially, well, their definitions differ, but it's the same mechanism. So what they're saying that, of course, like, so for opening opposition, what they say is that is even in their best case, it's a deadlock in the opening half. So what happens is the OG tries to say, make it seem as if it's Kanye West that represent eccentricism in our world. However, like opening opposition is like, oh no, it's workaholics that should be defined as eccentric. However, both sides' definition don't really initially work because neither give a mechanism to why eccentricism is either Kanye West or why eccentricism is workaholics. They fall into the same fallacy which opposition actually criticized, is that the workaholics, some workaholics may be eccentric, but not all eccentric people are workaholics. Same for closing opposition. Some people with like creativity may be eccentric, but not all eccentric people are creative artists. So in that sense, what the narrative that opposition is trying to push in general is that they're trying to limit who can be an artist in our world because they only define artists as, like my member speaker gave, artists and their personality is deeply intertwined with the work that they create. So by limiting only eccentric people to be able to become artists, they're limiting the scope of diversity of art, which is exactly going against the very crux of the case that they are all trying to lie. So in that case, both opposition benches fail to not only one, engage in the debate properly by not only like bringing some substance, but then secondly, they also kick out their only like other impact, which is diversity of art, with like undermining or underscoring the very narrative of who can be artists in our world. With that being said, let's move on to our first class of what art needs to be. First, art is an expression of the artist's identity, as my member speaker said. Necessary imposing limitations on what can be produced as art is the narrative that is coming from opposition. And that is the exact narrative that we want to fight against, because diversity of art was recognized on both sides of the house to be important. I said 6. And then secondly, our second layer of analysis of art don't only have to be about societal change. That was the unique extension that closing government gave. Art can be fun. It doesn't have to be a means of achievement for societal change. We demonstrated other specters in our society that could push societal change, and art could later reflect that on a ripple effect. And we're saying that art need not be the only bench upon which eccentricism or like societal change is advocated for. As a member of government mentioned, there are substitutes for this. People can engage in politics for that. The point is not a counterfactually sufficient enough. However, there is no replacement for the substitute of art. Art is the only silver lining that allows all individuals of all diversities to express their identities. We tell you this is a very important and special opportunity that should not be limited. Again, yes, eccentric people can create legitimate art. However, the debate is not about good art and bad art. It is about art itself. And it does not mean that the narrative should be imposed as a blanket narrative for the whole. Non-eccentric artists are also able to create legitimate art. So to give like a case example or to better illustrate what my member was trying to say, there are some artists who want to use their art as a personal representation of their narrative and their story. Artists such as Kara Walker uses her art to illustrate what Black American slaves have gone through in history. And such minority artists do not have the, I guess, legitimate, or they do not have the privilege or luxury of being perceived as quirky and in order for their narrative to be underscored by society. Because this is kind of like the minority artists are already marginalized in our mainstream art. So, and then such art, even without being quirky, was well received and created social controversy. It created greater advocacy for these racial minority artists in the status quo, meaning that not all good art, like even buying at their best case, needs to be eccentric in order for society to perceive and receive the message that these artists want to give as an extension of their identity. So in that sense, we're saying that even in their best case, saying that eccentric art can be only created by eccentric people, that's not really what's happening in status quo. Going back, okay, I'll receive POI from closing.
Yes, this narrative does not limit the personalities, but it provides the opportunity for individuals to explore their most private and personal and eccentric part of their life.
Okay, but Firstly, we're not excluding and we're not underscoring that eccentric people can create art. That's not the case given by government bench. And in this motion, we're saying that eccentric people can also be artists, but non-eccentric people can also be artists in the status quo. And that's the case that government is giving. While as opposition should defend and say that eccentric people are the only actors that can create art, which was given by the motion. That is not how you built your case. So that is not an attack that you should be forming. And then second class, let's move on to that, okay? Which side leads to more diversity in art, which is what both sides wanted. It's not okay for the DLO to say it harms non-eccentric people, and non-eccentric people, the harms of non-eccentric people are marginal. That's exactly quoting our jug. No, it leads to the mental and psychological damage of these artists, that their identity is not worthwhile in looking at by society, which was the harms mentioned by my member. We think societal denial to one's identity is the worst form of impact to achieve in diversity of art in our society. This literally harms and undercuts diversity in art. More personal art is available to non-eccentric people in government side because by definition, eccentricism is unorthodox behavior. So the majority of the people confined to orthodox behavior, right? So in that sense, the greater majority of people can engage into art under our role, which is exactly the point that closing opposition was trying to take. But in this case, we out-trumped them. Thirdly, why we outweigh the opening half. Let's go over there. So much of their debate is how, comes out the example, Kanye West, Olympia, etc. They only talk about how these needs to be some societal change. However, we tell you more about principal justification as to why art ought to be and why it should open as possible. Art as an extension of one's identity. Secondly, why we CO. CO is the only one as out of debate because they only come up with the country definition of what eccentricism means. Remember, opposition defines eccentric as different in individual ways. That is called diversity, not eccentricism, and which was already constructed by the Prime Minister. Again, opposition bench argues only about they only raise definition challenges up to this point in their debate. So that is why they are out of this debate more than proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you for your speech. Now I'd like to welcome very last speaker to the debate podium. Thank you. So babe, you can start whenever you are ready.
Okay. Okay, I'll begin now. Speaker, since we're all debaters, we think that everyone has their own obsessed debate pen. We all have very size of like debate notes that we want, or we have every filler word that everyone uniquely has on their own. We think that's every geeky part that every individual can have. We think that everyone can be geeky and everyone has somewhat unique part of their own that is somewhat shy to tell it openly to the society because society says, oh no, it's not really being normal. It's not really being, okay to have in society, or it's not really thing that everyone has in a common way. We think that everyone is different and everyone has unique on their own because we all grew up in different settings, different backgrounds with different relationships. We think that's why everyone has different preferences. We all have our own passion and enthusiasm that you are so immersed to it, but a little bit shy to tell people, which is a very core identity of you. We think that that's why, all in all, being eccentric is not a gravely extreme thing like shouting I'm a god in a society or in a street, but rather is a special part of you that derived from your own personal experiences that you have accumulated or you have chosen or you have collected throughout your life experiences. We are the side actively telling and encouraging it is okay to be you. It is okay to be a little geeky and a little bit special because that part is actually necessary and is essential to the art that you are going to create in your career. That's why we think that CO's unique contribution matters in this debate. Oshi was simplifying the debate by running a case that eccentric is being abnormal. It's not really helpful to art. Whereas OO talked about they did bring somewhat characterization on eccentric, but did not really make a linkage as to why such traits, for example, like grit, is so eccentric. That's where CO's exclusive contribution enters. Number one, I've told you what do we mean by eccentric and why that eccentricity is existing to everyone and why we have such eccentricity based on our experiences. But secondly, we told you why we actually actively celebrate the existence of this narrative saying that eccentricity is essential to your art. So first, engage to closing government's extraneous rebuttal. So from the very beginning, CG or the government bench as a whole can never win this debate when they never provide you their counterfactual as to what would happen in their world. If eccentricity is not an essential pillar of the art, what would be considered as essential to your world of art? We think that's simply no comparative coming off from any of the government bench speakers. But some rebuttals towards CG. Firstly, they talked about how CG kind of misrepped our opposition bench's case as if we said all artists should go against societal norms or whatsoever. Make a clarification: being eccentricity or being geeky is not really being different from normal. We're not like fighting or revolutionary to society. But secondly, they talked about how being eccentric is actually this narrative actually hinders and hampers artists from expressing themselves. No, as we have told you in our point of information, actually our side is the one that liberates or democratizes artists because we let them to explore their own self, let them to explore their eccentricity and actively show that in the art, because we're telling that it's okay and it's necessary. Your geeky part is necessary to your art when you create their own artworks. We think that people, even if at the past, who hated their own geeky part because society says it's not really being normal, society says it's not okay, now they can transformation their hatred or their a little bit shy part to their art in a very healthy manner. Now they will get be more motivated and encouraged to show that in a more healthy manner in their art. We think that that's an exclusive benefit only coming out from closing opposition. But let's engage to government bench, because basically other parts of CG was similar to OG. So firstly, OG's stance was that, if you become eccentric too much, it goes to the extent of illegal, and how creativity is different from eccentricity. Number one, it's basically an assertion to say, too much eccentric leads to illegality, and being creative is not really same to eccentric. That's why if they cannot provide any reasonings to their premise of their case, they can simply never win this debate. But let me still engage to the part as to how they talked about being too much eccentric can be lead to extent of illegal. We think that illegal actions would be punished naturally by the criminal justice system. But secondly, if that's an expression of your or manifestation of your eccentric part or unique part, we think that's fine, because anyway, if it becomes a overly illegal actions, there would be a condemnation or there would be a punishment in another sector of part. But secondly, they talked about how because art is an expression of true self, if this narrative exists, individuals would not be CG's extension OG. Two clarifications to make. Number one, we think that this narrative simply does not force or make people to become eccentric from now on or from this moment. Rather, this narrative helps artists to think their most personal and individual part, special part of them, a little bit geeky part, and to express them and actively encourage them to show them and manifest them in their artworks. But secondly, we think that because every individuals have different settings and different backgrounds, as I've told you in our member speech, they can actually choose what kind of subject that I'm going to use in my geeky parts. For example, my obsession towards or my obsession towards debate notes or whatsoever. Now, individuals will be able to choose one of those your geeky parts as your subject of your art, and we will going to use your own lens and point of view to draw that picture or make the music or whatsoever. And we think that that's how your individual choices of making eccentricity or your source of eccentricity would be now transformed into your form of art. And we think that that's a process that the CO is telling you. But lastly, they talked about how they want to lower down the entry barrier and make it more appealing to public, because that's how art can work better. Number one, we think that OG or government as a whole brings out that stance. They're simply shutting out the minority or unique or diverse forms of arts. They're only acknowledging mainstream, normal, or regular form of art and making a distinction as to what is normal or what is mainstream or whatsoever. But secondly, why is this so problematic? Before that, POI from any houses?
Yeah. So if we buy your analysis that everyone can be quirky in certain extent, then what does the counterfactual population of the non-eccentric people look like if we buy your analysis that everyone is quirky in some ways, therefore they're eccentric?
No, because this narrative would be so strong that everyone can be geeky and everyone is geeky. Now these individuals who at the past did not think they're not geeky or not special will find their own part that could, this could be a little bit special part of me, or a little bit different part of me that I can actually be differentiated with other people, and they will actually now start maybe or healthy in a healthy way and encouraged to show their quirky part and now able to join that pool of art together. And that's how at the end of the day, consequently, the art will be more diverse forms, it will be more liberated, it will be more democratized, it will be more have diverse forms of arts at the end of the day. But secondly, why is shutting out minority or diverse forms of art so problematic? Because art is by nature a manifestation of your personality, your own accumulated experiences, that what you have in your life. Now, OG stance denies the very fundamental nature of the art. But even if this is not true, the government bench cannot simply win this debate, because comparatively on your side, you did not provide a counterfactual of what is a fundamental purpose or primary purpose of art, which is the unique contribution coming out from closing opposition. But lastly, since OG did not characterize what it means to lower down the entry barrier, let me do it for you. So it'll probably mean more people would choosing art or music with high scores from critiques, or more arts would be now catering to critiques' needs to get more stars or more hearts in the melon or whatsoever. We think that artists would consequently lose incentive to create personal or distinctive form of art of their own. This is where our extension comes from. We can fight mainstream art that only comes from limited schools or limited alumni of certain art schools or certain branches of art. Now you're actively encouraging and saying that it's okay to have diverse forms because everyone has different quirky or geeky parts of their own. We think that now actually we are the one who actually liberalizing and democratizing. That's what we're actually taking the very benefit that the government bench is today advocating for. For these reasons, I'm very more than proud to oppose.
Thank you for your speech, and thank you every teams for showing a wonderful debate. Now please go back to the main room.